Welcome back to another episode of Dreamcatchers Presents the Jason Smith Show. And who am I here with today? I am here with science. That's who I'm here with today, science. Let me give y'all a little introduction because science is something that I am super infatuated with. So I had to get the professor. I had to go to my alma mater, UW-M. I'm interested in biology and water. Right here, professor is literally, that's his field, biological sciences and freshwater science. But who is Professor? I am talking about Professor John Berges. Professor John, how are you today, man?
I am well, thank you.
Listen. I really, hold on, put that a little closer to you. I was super excited to have you on this podcast. Ask Joseph. This is all I kept talking about. Even today, he was like, who's the guest today? I was like, you know who the guest is today. Because, like, he knows we grew up together. I wasn't thinking about science and stuff like that growing up. But once I got out of college, something in my brain just clicked. And it was like, what is science? So I had to look it up. What is science? And then I realized that, okay, all science does is tell you, it doesn't give you the why as in purpose reason. All it does is looks at what's there, and it tells you how it happened. It attempts to tell you how it happens. So then once I got done, I was like, okay, so everything is science. At the end of the day, there's science to, everything. But for you, how did you get into science? That's my story. How did you get into science, the love and passion for science?
Well, I kind of stumbled into it. I love what you just said there. This idea that it's just kind of asking questions and figuring out how things work, because that's where I came to it. I've got nobody in my family who's a scientist, and until I was probably in my teens and late high school, I never met anybody who was a scientist. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but the one thing I did know is I loved figuring out how things work. That was the key. Like, wow, how's this put together? What's inside it? And maybe I come by that honestly because my grandmother used to talk about my grandfather, who passed when I was just a baby, but he used to say he was always curious about everything. He was always taking things apart to see what went on inside. He could never put them back together again after that, but he was always curious about how things worked and what was going on, and I share that. And so at the heart of it, I wanted to understand things, and I wanted to know how they worked. And up until very close to the end of high school, I really didn't know I wanted to go into science. But I did know that things like math came really easily to me. They made sense. And that led to a situation where a lot of my teachers said, you're a good mathematician and you do well in physics. You should be an engineer. And I got to tell you, honest to God, I said to my guidance counselor, engineer, I don't want to drive a train. Because seriously, for me, I'd never really thought about science. I didn't know what engineering was. I really didn't. So then I sat down and had a really hard think, and I thought, what can I do? What should I do? And of all the things I saw in the world, living things were the thing that really intrigued me. Because, mechanical things you take apart and they're just pieces. But living things, they interact with each other and they fit into places and they have homes. And so that idea that there's a biological system out there that fits into an ecology, that fits into a system of our world, that was what I wanted to understand. That was my dream.
I think that it's so fascinating because for me, life, man, you just hit it right on the head, because life is what really got me in, because honestly, just a whole bunch of questions like, what is life? Like, what is this? Like, can we measure consciousness? Do we know what consciousness is? I just start going down this rabbit hole of just thoughts like, hold on, what is this? Thoughts vibrate? Do thoughts vibrate? Is everything a frequency? Does everything vibrate? Everything is always in motion. Energy can't be created, nor all of this stuff just start coming in my head. But the common source was life. What is life? So where did freshwater come from? Because we know about the biological sciences, but how did you get even more specific and got into water?
Well, I guess there's a few things that play into that. When I was growing up, we had a small cottage, a really kind of humble little cottage without much going for it, but it was near Lake Huron, one of our Great Lakes. I grew up in Canada, and we used to go there every summer. And so I got really used to taking long walks on the beach and watching the lake. And so that really got me thinking about how this lake works, who lives in it, how do waves, how are waves created, and how does water move, and why is the lake never really the same any two times you look at it? Look at how changeable it is. The shore changes. And so bits of things wash up on shore and you pick them up, and it was kind of fun figuring out where they came from. And then I took a trip to visit some relatives who lived in Florida, and I got to look at the ocean. And even more interesting, because it was kind of like the lakes, but there were a whole bunch of other living things in there, and I really got intrigued with that. And so from that point forward, boy, I was hooked. So living things, but I think the other thing that was always fascinating to me, we are not super connected to the environment in which we live. So we don't have a situation very often. I'm thinking about people in Texas these days, but we don't have a situation very often where you say, I can't get out of my house today because the wind's blowing too hard and holding the door closed. Okay, maybe a hurricane does that, but that's uncommon. Or we don't have a situation where we say, I can't go out today because there's not enough oxygen in the air. Maybe in one of the Japanese cities on a bad pollution day, that might be the case. But that's really rare for us. So we don't think about the environment in which we live. But in the ocean, oh boy, if the current's going the wrong way and as an organism, you're not going where you want. You're going where the current is. That environment dominates your life. And similarly, the nutrients and the gases like oxygen dissolved in that water, they're going to tell you whether you can live or where you can go and where you can't go. And so you really, to understand living things in the ocean, you have to get your head around the physics. You have to get your head around the chemistry. And so part of my excitement about those places, those fields, was you didn't have to do just one thing. You didn't have to just be a biologist. You could be a chemist. You could be a physicist, and you could meld all of those together to study a water, because you have to understand them all.
Wow. Something that caught my attention immediately is when you ask a question like, why does water move, or how does water move? How and why, how does water, why is water in a constant state of flow?
Well, so I teach an entire course about that, but the short answer is because there's two really serious things going on. One, our planet is revolving, and so that imparts a certain motion to the water on the surface of our planet. But the other thing is our planet is heated and cooled in different places, and that makes wind blow. And the minute you have wind blow, the wind is going to push the water. And so the combination of forces, the wind blowing on the water and the planet itself turning and rotating, that's where most of our motion goes. The other thing for the oceans that's really important is the moon and the sun, because they exert a force of gravity on the water, and that's what causes our tides. In the coastal areas, the water goes up and down, and the force of gravity of the moon on the water causes that. So there's a lot. That is beautiful, and it's complicated, and it's intensely mathematical.
No, that's definitely beautiful, especially because, and that's what I came to realize, that all of this is science is beautiful because you get to see nature, you get to analyze nature, and you get to see how amazing it is, the amazing stuff that it does, the patterns and stuff that it creates. But something I want to ask Dr. John, because listen, Dr. John, I was raised in a church. In the church, not the church. Some people go to church. Some people went to church. Thank you, Jesus. I was raised in a church, and the church said that some of this science stuff wasn't factual. But then I got curious, started doing my own research, and science started making sense to me. So when it comes to, let's see, a topic like evolution, what does science say evolution is?
Yeah, so I've always found it curious that in some cases we end up in conflict, because I too grew up in a family that went to church, and I have a fairly strong faith myself, and it wasn't until quite late in life that I realized that there had to be, in some people's mind, a conflict there. I guess what I saw in writings like the Bible an expression of something happening. So let's take an idea like God created the world. So the book of Genesis in the King James Bible tells us that God created the world. And we can take that as an idea, but the Bible tells us some things about the order in which that was done, but it doesn't tell us about the mechanisms. And in science, one could argue, we're exploring those mechanisms. I think many scientists would take the view that, well, there might have been some being out there, God, who created the earth, but our ability to explore that with science is not good, and so we're going to set that aside, and rather than discuss, who this God person is and why they did this, we're going to look at how they did it. And so at a certain level, I find it difficult to believe that understanding the mechanisms by which God might have created the world is going to be particularly offensive, because I'm not saying that God didn't create the world. All I'm doing is exploring the ways in which he created the world or she created the world. So there is that level. And in fact, there are certain groups within established churches, I'm thinking of the Jesuits in the Catholic Church, who really embraced that. And they made the discipline of science core to their religious studies, because they believed that by understanding, using science, the world, they magnified God's greatness. And so they didn't find any incompatibility at all. So different groups have taken different viewpoints on this. Evolution became an absolute critical problem in the United States, but it really didn't have the same critical create the same critical arguments in many other countries. So the U.S. is really exceptional in that. Britain, it was a non-issue. France, Japan, most of those nations never had the same arguments that we had in the United States. And I probably better for a historian or a sociologist to explain why that might be. But as a biologist, the simple expression of evolution is that we can look at a group of living things, and by changing or manipulating that group of living things, we can change what they are. We can impose what we call a selection on those group of living things, and we can change them. So I'll give you two examples of that. One has to do with small things like bacteria. So we have bacteria that infect us. And sometime after the Second World War, we started using antibiotics that come from a variety of groups like fungi. Penicillin would be a good example. And so we can kill those bacteria with penicillin. We're imposing a selection. So some of those bacteria are killed by penicillin and some of those are not. A very small number are not. But if you expose them again and again and again, what happens is those that are susceptible to penicillin die. And the survivors that resist penicillin and can live with it continue to reproduce. So after some period of time, you have created a selection where most, if not all, of the bacteria that exist are resistant to penicillin. We've done that experiment, and now most doctors don't even bother prescribing penicillin as an antibiotic. It doesn't work. We have broad penicillin resistance among all the bacteria that infect our bodies, and we have caused that. We have imposed a selection. So we have caused those bacteria to evolve, to change, and now that's the result. I'll give you a big example,
Let's
too.
go.
In Mozambique, we have a species of elephant. So there are actually two species of African elephant. Not many people realize that, but we have Indian elephants, we have African elephants, and we have two species. In the country of Mozambique, we hunt elephants. Well, some people hunt elephants, and they pick the elephants with the biggest tusks. Both the male and the female have tusks in this species. So what happens over time is the elephants with the largest tusks get killed, and the elephants that are left behind are the ones with the smaller tusks. The ones with the smaller tusks reproduce, and they reproduce and create elephants with smaller tusks. So over time, the average size of the Mozambique elephant's tusks has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, and now it is conceivable, after more than 200 years of hunting elephants with big tusks, that we are going to eventually see tusks in the Mozambique elephants disappear. We will have selected and caused that to disappear. Now, genetically, what's happening is we are essentially selecting against tusks. It's a bad thing to have tusks, and so the organisms that have tusks are removed, and the ones that get to reproduce and pass on their genes don't have tusks. If they don't have the genes for big tusks, eventually we'll reach the point where those genes disappear from the population. We've created effectively a new organism which doesn't have those genes. So that's the sort of selection. Two things that become very controversial is we know we can do this kind of artificially. I just described humans doing that. Is that what happens naturally? Is that how new species on the planet are formed? And most biologists would say, well, if it can happen this way artificially, we can envision many different ways on the planet where new species could indeed have been formed. And so that is a mechanism we explore in the creation of new species. Many people don't like that because their biblical text would tell them that God created species, and in principle, they don't change. Secondly, we start applying that to humans, and people get very uncomfortable because they say, well, if humans can change like that, what does that say about us? And then we get into some really fuzzy moral arguments too. So, that would be an example.
So first off, yes, exactly. I think that once you get past once people start to apply evolution, like what you just explained about bacteria and elephants, to humanity, that's when people get a little squirmish because they like, oh my goodness, like, what are you saying? Because I think in most people's heads, humans aren't like quote unquote animals. So you know what I'm saying? So it's like it's the hierarchy. It's like humans, and then you got all the animals, and then it's like all the humans looking down on the animals. Because what you were describing, because I know Carl Sagan, that's somebody who I love Carl Sagan. That's one of the guys who got me into it, because he was able to do what you just did, break it down so simplistic. And I watched one video of he was talking about natural selection and basically how the dominant ate the non-dominant, essentially, and you get to a point, like you were saying, how the bacteria that die from penicillin, they deteriorated, went away, went extinct, and then the strong survived. Essentially, I mean, that's kind of what happened with us. It's funny because I remember my aunt is everything to me. And I remember like growing up, she told me, because like we were talking about this, because I was a kid with questions.
Yeah.
And I was just like, how? This doesn't make sense. Like, how do you just, it just didn't make sense. And then my auntie was like, even if evolution is real, who's to say God didn't do it? And I say, I guess we don't know. Like and I know that science kind of not pushes the question away, but it's not really interested in that question because you can't prove or disprove. So it's hard to even put energy to it.
Yeah, I think there's a real problem there, and you have to think carefully about the questions that you ask and which are amenable. I remember I had a student who really wrestled with this, and it's we've got to be able to tackle all questions. And I say, all right, here's a question: how do you prove that your mother loves you? I mean, can we tackle a question like that in a scientific approach? And they looked at me in kind of semi-shock, and I said, I don't need to analyze that in a scientific way because I know my mother loves me. And for me, that's a belief which has been proven and tested over my lifetime. But to analyze that in a scientific way, it makes almost no sense because I'd have to try and define love, and humanity over its existence has tried that and has never been able to. So I don't think I give myself much chance of that. And secondly, you'd have to develop some kind of objective test and a scale to quantify love. How much love is there? And this what's the point? I would often, when I get into evolutionary arguments with students, which I do try to avoid because I just don't see them as productive. I don't think anyone's going to end up happy. I simply say to them, you have a belief. I said, I'm not trying to challenge or distort that belief, but if it is other than a belief, then maybe we have something to talk about. So what evidence could I present to you? You conceive of evidence that I could present to you that would prove to you that God doesn't exist. And they say, oh, no, but I know God exists. I say, okay, well, then there's no point in having the argument or the discussion, is there? On the other hand, I understand the process of evolution, and I can tell you specific things that if you presented evidence to me, I would say, ooh, we have to rethink evolution because that is not consistent with it. And I would, if you presented evidence like that, I would be prepared to abandon my ideas about evolution. That's the difference between a belief system and a process of science.
Professor John with us, we're friends. We're friends. Joseph, no, because we have these discussions. And that's what I think people misconstrue about science. Science is open to being wrong. There is nothing wrong with being wrong in science. Science wants to be proven wrong. Prove me wrong. Yeah. Now we got something else to even tackle.
Well, you mentioned Carl Sagan, and I too admire Carl Sagan, but at one point I remember reading something he wrote, and he said, surprisingly often in science, there are scientists who, having held one point of view for a fairly long time, write and reconsider and say, we held this position, but it now turns out that that's not correct. We need to revise that. So the idea that we could say, all right, we've been wrong, now let's rethink that. Think of a time where somebody in charge of a religion did that. Think of a time where somebody in a political party did that. It's just, these are not things that politicians or religious leaders do, but it's things that scientists do. Now, not always, because change is hard, and we can't forget that scientists are human beings. We've got all the same foibles as any other human beings. We are inconsistent. We get mad. No,
Professor. Like, this is exactly what I was looking for, because these are the everything that you said is what's in my mind and like what goes through it, like what goes through my mind. I think that evolution is a concept that is gonna be hard for people to grasp, but I feel like if people just sat down and listened to it explained simply, like how you just explained it, it'll open their minds up a little bit. But like you were saying about the religions and the politicians, I think that they don't want to how scientists are open to being wrong. Politicians and religious figures aren't open to being wrong, because then that challenges, especially religious figures, that challenges their whole belief system, their whole lifestyle, and their whole life, essentially.
Yeah, I think they put, many people put a great premium on being absolutely consistent and never changing, and I don't feel that way. I mean, I think that's a dangerous thing to prize if you want to be a scientist. I would say the other component of the dream for me, once you've begun to explore and question, there's a real importance to sharing that knowledge. And so I found that in beginning to do science, there were a couple options I could have chosen. I could have joined an academic research unit. I could have joined a government agency to do the work I do. But I chose the university because it involved passing that knowledge on and teaching. In particular, the sort of teaching that I really prize is working with students on research projects. And so not just saying, here is a piece of knowledge, I'm going to pass that on or explain it, but actually creating new knowledge with students. And when I talk to students about that process, I often, at this stage of my career, I'll explain it this way. And I'll say, research is always a partnership when it's done with multiple people, and you find the skills that you can contribute, and you find the people who can do the best job of their particular parts of the work. I say, so now I go out as a professor and I look for students. So what's the partnership here? Well, the student doesn't know very much yet, but they are absolutely full of ideas, and they're full of new ideas, and they're full of wacky ideas. And some of them are good and some of them aren't, but they got the ideas. 2, they got the energy. If they get fixated on an idea, they can spend all night working at it at the lab bench. I'm the old guy now. I can't spend all night at
Professor
the
John
lab
can't
bench.
hang no more.
And I'm running out of ideas. I'll be frank, I'm running out of ideas. But give me an idea, and I got a lot of experience. I can evaluate the idea, and I can say, that's got potential, or let's not waste our time on that idea just yet. And the other thing I can do is I can give you the clever tools and tricks that are going to help you develop that idea. So put me together with an eager young graduate student. Hey, we're a really solid team. So I'm a little bit of a vampire here. I'm always looking for young students that I can drag into the lab. But we form partnerships, and that part of education, that ability to work together, because they come out of it having learned stuff, and I come out of it having advanced the field, got a bright young mind on track. That's just super, super exciting.
No, I bet. I know that is absolutely. So basically the dream for you is so what would you say? Because typically I started off, but I was just so excited for this when I wanted to get right into the science. But typically I start off the podcast by asking, what is the dream, or what was the dream?
Well, I think it's as simple as there is the university I went to in Canada. It's got a strange name. It's the University of Guelph.
Yeah, I couldn't pronounce it, so that's why I didn't say it.
So Guelph, it's actually an Italian name.
Okay.
The Guelphs were a royal family, kind of like the Medici. Mm-hmm. They weren't as successful as the Medici. They got wiped out. But the Guelphs and the University of Guelph, its motto is, I'm going to butcher the Latin, but rerum cognoscere causas, which happens to be the same motto as the London School of Economics, to know the causes of things. I love that. That's the understanding of how things work. And so the things I'm most interested in is how we put together an ecosystem where things live. How do we support a place where things can live? And I think the reason that intrigues me so much is we have that on Earth. And as far as we know, this is the only place in the universe where that exists. But we're starting to look at other places like Mars. And we're saying, if we go to Mars, how do we build a place where we can live? And to me, that is an utterly fascinating question. I'm not sure we can do it. I'm not as optimistic as people like Elon Musk. I don't know whether we can do this or not. But by understanding how our ecosystem here works, that will tell us whether such things are possible.
Professor,
I think it's harder than what we think it might be.
I'm an optimist. I'm a super optimist. And I believe we will.
Yeah.
And I believe in aliens. Now, it took my brother right here. It took my brother right here to convince me to believe in aliens.
Okay.
Because I was against it. When I say I was raised in the church, listen, I was preaching from 3 years old to about 16 years old. That's how deeply embedded. Like, my family owns the church.
I hear that.
You feel what I'm saying?
I hear that in your tone.
Yeah, so I was super embedded, and I'm like, it ain't no aliens, none of that. It took him years and years of talking to me about it. And then I came to a conclusion is, why wouldn't there be life elsewhere? Like, dude, we are on Earth, which Carl Sagan calls a blue dot. A small blue dot in the solar system, in a galaxy. We don't know how many galaxies there are. We don't know how many planets there are. So why wouldn't there be life, some type of life? I'm not saying a human being. I don't know what the life looks like. But what do you think about that?
Oh, I'm on side with your brother here. I think the probability is solidly on the side of there being life elsewhere. Now here's the problem. So we've got a noted astrophysicist named Drake created what's called the Drake equation. And
not the rapper.
No, not Drake the rapper, who's also a Canadian, by the way. But the Drake equation attempts to put values on the probability. And so, we have to have a planet that looks that will have liquid water. We're pretty much sure liquid water is necessary. So what fraction of planets have liquid water? There's a number for that. And then of those planets, what fraction of those planets have, I don't know, something else we need? And you can create this long equation, and it's all probabilities, and we don't know the specific numbers for that, but that creates the Drake equation. And you take the Drake equation and you say, well, how many planets are there likely to be out there? And now we have some estimates of that, and the estimates are pretty high, and so the higher those are, however small the probabilities are, the odds get better and better. So that sounds good. Now, here's the problem. And the problem is, how likely is it we're going to find them and encounter them? Because that's really what we want. If they exist, that's fine. Yeah. But we don't want that. We want to encounter them. We want to meet them, and we want to meet them at the same stage as we're at, so we can have a nice conversation and meet some real aliens we can get down to lunch with. And the two biggest problems with that are distance and time. And so currently, even if we were to find aliens on some of our nearest stars, we have no practical way to get there because we can't travel fast enough. We talk in terms of light years. So if something is 100 light years away, if we were able to travel at the speed of light, it would take us 100 years to get there. The problem is we can't travel even the barest fraction of light speed right now. So the distance defeats us to start with, and even radio signals, they're not traveling all that fast. So you send a message, at best, absolutely horribly optimistic. It's going to take 100 years to get there, and they got to read it and decode it and send it back. So 200 year, you see where I'm going?
Yeah, I see.
The second problem is, if you look at Earth, we have had something like life here for between 3 and 4 billion years. But we've had a thinking, reasoning organism on the planet able to communicate off-planet for probably something less than 100 years. 100 years in 3,000 million years. It's just a blip in time.
Yeah.
What if that's the same for other civilizations? So we're going to have billion years and a little blip, and that's assuming that we persist for any length of time and don't do ourselves in with a nuclear war or other such thing. And that's got to line up with another civilization doing the same thing with the same blip. And so we got the space problem and we got the time problem. These have to line up because we could have had a civilization that did that and flared, but they're 10,000 years in the past, and we're never going to. Oh, do you see?
I'm starting to see the problem. But Professor, some.
But I, like you, I'm not prepared to be pessimistic.
Because, like, come on, somehow, some people say that Earth is just a science project for aliens.
Yeah, sure.
Now I don't believe that, but I do think that I know that listen, my unscientific opinion, I am 95% sure aliens are real.
Well, we can hope that out there's some aliens who've maybe cracked the light speed problem.
Because I hope we can meet them.
They'll come to see us, or maybe they've even cracked the time problem, and that would be kind of cool too.
What is time? Like, time is something that always. That's another thing. Just like life, I never understood time. Because a clock measures it. But I don't think it's possible. Do you think it's possible to accurately define time?
Well, I mean, ever since Einstein started playing around with our concept of time, I think everyone's been a little head-scratchy about what this means. I mean, in principle, in our universe, the speed of light becomes a constant. So what does that mean? Well, it means if you travel fast and have a light that you're transmitting, then something must change, because if I am stationary, light's traveling from me at a certain speed. But as soon as I start moving, I'm adding that speed to light. Light should be traveling faster. But it can't, because it's a constant. So what is going to be happening there? How can we overcome that? And Einstein made the leap that said, as you start to travel, time for you changes.
Light does
for
it.
A minute.
That is.
Light is still a constant, but the faster you go, the passage of time for you changes, which means in principle, as you approach faster and faster, closer to the speed of light, for you, time, they say, dilates. It passes slower for you. So if you were to travel at the speed of light, relative to the people that stayed behind and did not travel, time for you would pass slower. So this has become a trope in science fiction. So the people on Earth send a traveler out who travels at light speed and comes back to Earth. And guess what? Earth is now 3,000 years in the future because time has almost stopped for this person who was traveling at light speed. How's that? These are predictions that Einstein made based on his observations of the universe. And so that's one possibility. But is it possible to then find a way around that, or travel in time, as we would say, we would have said another, to travel not by going at that sort of a speed, a relativistic travel, but by changing the fundamental nature of space, by warping space. And so in Star Trek, they've created a warp drive, which doesn't change time. It changes space somehow. That's kind of cool.
That's super cool.
I like that idea.
Because like I know about Einstein's concept of like space time and how so and that makes sense because like a super duper simple example that I thought about was, okay, if somebody's walking versus somebody running time will go by slow because you're gonna get tired.
Yeah,
you know what I'm
saying. The single experiment I think that's fascinating is we can go pretty fast in some of our rocket jets, and so they have done experiments using atomic clocks. So these things are super accurate. They go to billionths of a second resolution. Take one of these and hold it stationary, put the other on a rocket plane, and start sending it around the Earth. And at the end of that, you compare them. And guess what?
What's happened?
The one that's been going at high speed runs slow relative to the ones. So that's indirect proof. And this experiment was done in the late 1960s, early 70s.
So the faster you go, the slower time is.
The slower time goes.
So is that why they say like when you're having fun, time goes by fast? Because that's true.
Well, Einstein made all sorts of jokes like that. Yes.
Because I mean it's true. So I heard you talk about earlier. You're talking about like the end of civilization. Do you think? Come on now, Professor John. Don't tell me our civilization will eventually collapse and not be here one day.
Well, boy, I mean, now to me, that's not a science question. That's a history and sociology question. Are human beings capable of managing their affairs and keeping us going? Because in terms of living things, I think living things could continue to grow and evolve and keep on. There are probably some physical limits to the length our planet can sustain itself. Eventually, the sun will burn out, gravitation will collapse, but we're talking billions, hundreds of billions of years before that sort of thing happens. So that's okay. We can't conceive of that time. I'm more concerned about human societies and what happens to them because as an ecologist, we talk a lot about the damage that human beings are doing to our planet's ecosystem. But the reality I think most people don't get is that one of the most vulnerable things in our ecosystem is us. You know, bacteria, cockroaches, many of these organisms, they're going to survive almost anything. But what about us?
What about us?
We are the vulnerable things. And there's a lot of us on the planet right now that aren't doing so well, right? So I think about all of our vulnerabilities. Save the whales, save the earth. Well, save the human beings. We've got to start thinking about what kind of a planet we're making for ourselves. And part of my desire to understand how the world works is really aimed at understanding, first of all, what we're doing and how we can repair some of the damages we're doing. One of the projects we've been working on lately has to do with plastics. We've been using an awful lot of plastics. Those plastics have been breaking down and getting into our aquatic ecosystems. And organisms in our aquatic ecosystems are gobbling up those little bits of plastic. What effect is it having? And more to the point, what can we do to prevent that plastic from getting into those systems or potentially to clean it up once it does? And the answers to those questions really demand that we understand what those compounds are doing, what those plastics are doing, and how they work, how they function. And if we can understand those things, will be a good step forward to either preventing damage or repairing it.
So in 200 1,000 years, say Earth's still here, humans still here. Do you think humans will look differently in 200? This is what you think in 200,000 years.
So the big unknown, and the reason I would really hedge on that is we've now started doing some things that we've never done, and no organism on our planet has ever done, and that is we now have the capacity to change our own genome. We now have the capacity to go in and tinker, and so far the only tinkering we've done is to fix mistakes. So if we have sickle cell disease, we can go in and we can say, now we know how that's caused. There's the gene error. We'll go in and fix that. Cool. But the next step might be to say, here's a gene that confers eye color. I want my kid to have brown eyes, not blue eyes. Let's fix that, please.
You can do that?
In principle, we're starting to understand how to. Most countries have now said, we're not going to do that. That's freaky. We will not allow that. But the technology that would permit it is pretty much established. There's some big question marks surrounding it. But morally, ethically, I don't think there's anyone on the planet that would do it. There may be people who would be able to find somebody and pay them and equip a lab
Elon Musk.
to allow it. Yeah. I would worry about some of the billionaires and maybe some of the authoritarian countries where this might go by. But once we start doing that, I think all bets are off.
Yes, it's wraps.
All bets are off.
Because once that happens, oh my goodness, people are going to be able to basically make the baby they want.
Yeah. Or start doing really freaky things like, what if I say, blue skin?
Oh my God,
that would be really cool.
Crazy. So basically, it's just the unknown, and I think that's what scared people though. I think I'm intrigued by the unknown. The unknown is beautiful to me. Like the fact that we don't necessarily 100% know how all of this came to be, but yet, like we're here and we're experiencing it. Like I'm just atoms and what? Like I think that is absolutely beautiful. But Professor, how does it feel to have all of this knowledge stored in your brain? Because I always wondered about that. Like I always wondered about like super smart people who like how is that? Like how does that feel to know you could be basically a biological encyclopedia?
Well, I guess it depends. I have never felt so the one thing I have always recognized is one, I have a better than average memory. I can organize things and I can recall them. So I carry a lot in my brain and I can pull it off the shelf. That's not necessarily anything remarkable. And nowadays, so I used to get involved in when I lived in the United Kingdom, in the UK, I used to get involved in what we call pub quizzes. So you go out for a drink at the pub, and then a question master gets up and everyone buys a round of drinks and sits down and he asks questions. And so, you have to, okay, so which cricket team won the championship in 1968? And which character on this soap opera is the one who's always in debt? And so you've got to, as a team, and a pub quiz, answer these questions. And I used to be really good at those because I had a good memory. I could pull out all these random facts. Now, you got a cell phone. It's like you got access to all of that. So this knowledge I've got, it's not so great given that I can use my cell phone to come up with these. But I've got a little better organized and I've got a little more integrated, and so I can probably do that sort of thing faster than most people yet. That may not be the case going forward. So that kind of knocks it down a step. I also, if I were to list my skills, I've trained myself how to analyze information really well. So you can give me a bunch of disparate facts and I can put them together and think them through. That's a real skill. Not everybody can do that. I'm pretty good at that. So I'll take a check mark there. And the other thing is I'm pretty patient. And not everybody's patient. And so maybe that's a skill too. But none of these things are like otherworldly. None of these are superpowers, huh? So I'm always intrigued when people say, "Oh, Professor Berges," it's like, no.
No, and I understand that because like the way I look at it, and the way what I like to typically say is, I look at learning like unlocking parts of your brain, because like I feel like everybody, in principle, has all the knowledge, quote unquote, there in their brain, but it's just about unlocking that part.
Yeah.
And then that's why I be like, because sometimes people will be like, man, I knew that, but they didn't know they knew that. It's because you already knew. You just unlocked that part.
Right. That's right. And the first step is recognizing that. And so I am so delighted when a student said, "Oh, wait, I did know that."
Yeah.
I think you are on the road. You're on your way now.
Exactly, Professor John. You were pretty humble. That was a pretty humble answer. I'm not gonna lie, but I still think you're a genius. I can't lie, because I'm sitting here asking you these questions and just learning stuff that I've never learned before. But I heard you talk about living in the UK, living in Canada, and now you're in America. It's like, what is that? So where did you? So you started off in Canada, I assume.
Yeah.
And then what's the pathway to America?
So I started in it's a series of explorations, and at each stage I thought, yeah, I'll go this far, but I won't go any further. And so I grew up in Ontario, southern Ontario, pretty near Toronto, which is our capital city in southern Ontario. And I thought, I like southern Ontario. It's a good place to live. And when I finished my first degree, I thought I should really go to an ocean because I'm interested in oceanography. And so I'll go to an ocean, but I'll probably come back. Mm-hmm. So I went to Vancouver in British Columbia, and I studied for my doctorate. And at the end of that, I thought, oh, this is kind of fun. I like this. I like Canada a lot. But the United States has got some interesting opportunities too. Maybe I could spend some time in the United States, but I'll come back. And so I went to do postdoctoral work at Brookhaven National Lab on Long Island. And when I was wrapping up there, a colleague at Queen's University in Belfast in Northern Ireland in the UK contacted me and said, "We have a job here. Would you be interested?" And it was a really intriguing job. It was in Europe, which at that point was emerging, and I knew a whole bunch of European colleagues, and I thought, oh, if I lived there, I'd be able to go and work in Italy sometimes, and I'd be able to go in Norway and do some work there, and maybe the south of Spain. Oh, that would be such a great opportunity because it's also close. So I thought, yeah, I'd do that for a few years, but I'll come back. And I ended up being there for 7 years. And then I met my wife, and we got together. She's from Australia.
Oh, wow.
And she got a job offer in the United States. And I thought, okay, in Milwaukee. And I thought, well, we could go back to Milwaukee. That's kind of in the similar area where I started. And so we came back. And our jobs developed. She's a biology professor too, works in the same department I do. And that led to a whole bunch of fun, collaborations and such. But after that, we have every 7 years, we have what's called a sabbatical leave, and we can go elsewhere and do things. And because of the Australian connection, we've now done a sabbatical leave in Australia. And so I've gone to Australia, Tasmania, that little island off the east coast of Australia, and I've done a sabbatical leave there and worked there too. So this is just a gateway to all sorts of things. And the cultures of those places are somewhat different. It's really fun. I've really enjoyed it. But your passport to it is science is pretty much the same everywhere. And so you have a common language. I'll never forget, I went to Spain and did some work with a Spanish scientist in the south of Spain, a town called Cadiz. And we went to a fish market. And in the fish market, we were just walking through the fish market, seeing all the different animals. And of course, we were using Latin because that's how we describe in science the animals. And so he was pointing at all these, and I was saying, oh, yes, I know that group. And so we went through this entire fish market and looked at all these different marine organisms. It was glorious. And then he said, oh, I have some family obligations tonight. Are you going to be okay on your own? I said, yeah. I said, I'm going to go out to dinner. I'm going to love trying some of these animals we've talked about. So I went into the restaurant, and they had a beautiful display case, and they had all these organisms set up there. And I went up, and you choose what you want. And all of a sudden, it hit me. I know what these organisms are. I know them better than the guy behind the counter, but I know the Latin names, not the Spanish names. And so I am now completely helpless. I'm going to have to point. Because I don't know any of these things in Spanish. I don't know the names. And yet I was able to communicate with a Spanish scientist because we have a third common language, Latin. So that it really came home to me how special science is, in that you have a community of people that speak a really a different language, and we can relate to each other across cultures.
So basically, science is a language within itself.
I think it is.
Because language is also something that fascinates me. Man, I'm fascinated by a lot, as you can see.
Yeah.
But language is something that fascinates me, because what is language? Like, because at the end of the day, isn't language just sounds? Like, are they just sounds that we interpret? and like, for example, if I went to another country where they speak no English, and I said, this is a microphone, they would look at me crazy, because they would say, what are you saying? Because it sounds like gibberish to them. But if they said it in their language and the symbols that they understand, they will understand it.
Yes. And let me tell you, even within one language, English, I've now, in my home, we have 3 versions. We have, my son was born in the U.S., so he speaks American English, I speak Canadian English, and my wife speaks Australian English. And there's a whole bunch of words that do not overlap between the 3. So we sometimes have communication problems where somebody will say something and we look at each other like, what? What did you just say? What was that word?
That's the brain. I think the brain is just so fascinating. The fact that we're able to decode this information, process this information, is absolutely amazing. But Professor John, how do you practice self-care? Because like your mind, I just feel like in my head, I just feel like you're always thinking and you're always just trying to figure something out. How do you practice self-care? Do you have time for it?
Yeah, you have to make time. And I'm not sure as a young man I really appreciated this, but burnout is a real problem. So there's 2 things that are absolutely important to me. I do yoga.
Okay.
So even if it's only 20 minutes once a day, I have to clear my mind. I have to sit down. I have to practice some form of mindfulness where I simply clear my mind. I do enjoy the physicality of yoga, some stretching, some strength, some motion, and that is good for the body. It clears my mind. I feel so much better afterwards. But it's also just a little focus, a little intention, a little thoughtfulness. And the other thing is I spend time with my family, and we put the cares of the world, the cares of our jobs aside, and we just enjoy things that we love doing together. And so we do a lot of biking. We get outdoors in the Wisconsin woods and hiking trails, and those things. Those are non-negotiable. We assign those priority first, and if other things have to take a beating because of it, we'll accept that.
Wow. So That answer surprised me, but I'm happy because I believe you should work on yourself and your family and your mind more than any other job, anything.
Yeah.
Like, you are what's most important. And so how do you define success?
Oh boy. Yeah, I think it's changed. It's changed over time. I think if what you're doing leaves the world better than you found it. How's that?
I love
I think
that.
I think I can't make it simpler than that. Whatever you're doing, if after you've done it, the world's a better place than when you started.
Success.
Success.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
And something else that caught in your last answer, you talked about yoga and mindful, because something I do, like, I bought a book. It's called Peak Attention. And it's basically talking about how to do mindful meditation, because that's what I do. I try to do it every day. It don't happen every day, but I try to do it before I come to work. Honestly, I sit in the car, and like the process that she was explaining was, because some people when you meditate, they think you're trying to clear, like you're trying to like throw, like, you know what I'm saying, just eliminate. It's really, because there's no way to just eliminate all thoughts. Thoughts are there, but a way that helped me was, like, thoughts are like a ocean, a river. It just continually flow. It just flow. But while you mindfully meditating, she says basically just pull your attention back to your breath. So as you're breathing, even as the thoughts are going, you know, because like obviously sometimes you're going to get attached to one thought, but then you'll realize, okay, that thought eventually disappears, and another one comes in. Yeah. But then you just, as long as you just stay focused on your breath and not even like, and just be there essentially. When I open my eyes, because I do it for about 12 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But when I open my eyes, when I'm done, oh my goodness, like I literally feel like weight lifted off of me.
And that the yogic principles, the breath is core to that, but also this idea of you're not resisting. The mind is going to go where the mind goes. Yes. You just travel with it, and then just acknowledge it, and you're subtly training yourself too. Lovely.
Man, oh man. Man, oh man. So now I like to get to a segment that I like to call This or That. And this is where I'm going to hit you with a couple options, and you just tell me what the answer is. Okay. What you say it is. Nobel Peace Prize or scientific discovery?
Oh, scientific discovery. Prizes. I remember Jack Benny, a comedian my dad loved. Jack Benny received many awards towards the end of his career, and the one line I loved, he stood up and he said, I don't deserve this award, but then again, I have arthritis and I don't deserve that either. So I love that. I just love that line. So.
I'm still in that quote. I'm not gonna lie to you, because that's a perfect.
It isn't it great?
Newton or Einstein?
Oh gosh, I think Einstein, Newton. Both of them received all sorts of honors during their lifetime. Newton was just a little too conventional for my liking. I mean, brilliant man in terms of his discoveries, given what we knew at the time. Just, he there was a pandemic during his life. Most of us during the pandemic went home and learned to bake bread or something like that. Newton went home and invented calculus.
Wow.
Yeah. So what did you do during the pandemic?
I'm laying in the bed.
Yeah, but Einstein, I think there's a quotation which goes something like, ability, skill hits a target that other people can't hit. Genius hits a target that other people can't see. And that was actually both of those guys, but Einstein in particular, he just viewed the world in a completely different way.
Yeah, because like I was fascinated by both, because once I learned about Isaac Newton, And I learned about, the apple falling from the tree. He trying to figure out, wait, how did that happen? But then I see that Einstein came in and kind of was like, Isaac, you know what I'm saying? You were right on some stuff, but I got a different perspective on it.
Yeah.
So that's why I would choose Einstein as well. And this last one, obviously, this is going to be easy. This is going to be easy for you. Space exploration or ocean exploration?
Oh, I don't know that that's that easy.
Oh, okay.
Can I have both?
Okay.
Because one of the ecosystems I find most fascinating on some of the moons of Saturn and Jupiter, we think we have oceans. Now they're not all water. They consist of different compounds, but they're mostly frozen, and under that frozen surface there may be living things. I think this is the best chance to find within our solar system life. And so those moons of Jupiter, those moons of Saturn may have living things in them, and those are frozen ocean worlds. So space and ocean, I think they go together right now. And
my goodness. Something I always wonder, this might be a stupid question, but so living things on other planets, obviously they wouldn't need the same. For example, would they need oxygen like us? Would they need water like us?
Well, we have plenty of things on Earth that don't need oxygen. So that's not necessary. A really good question. I don't think. Well, would we recognize life if it didn't have certain things? And I think the problem is we might not even see it as life if it didn't do certain things. Pretty much, I think a biologist would agree you need water. Water is pretty much there. Now, other things, gosh, good question. What other things would be absolutely essential? We are carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, phosphorus, sulfur-based things. But which of those could you get rid of? I don't know.
That's a tough question. All right, Professor John. Last question. So I heard that we have something to do with stars. I heard that stars exploded, and that's how we got nitrogen and or whatever. So are we all just stars?
Yeah. So yeah, we are stardust. Joni Mitchell and all that. Yeah, that's pretty much what we understand. So in the dim times before our universe had much form, there probably weren't very complicated atoms, and maybe even just the very simple atoms like hydrogen. Stars, gravity begins with a collection of matter, and you get more and more of it together, and eventually the pressure of the gravitation will cause what we call fusion. That's the reaction going on in our sun that creates all that energy. But as a consequence of that fusion, we start putting atoms together. And in putting atoms together, you create all the elements that exist. And so stars are basically element factories. And so every element that's in you, we believe, was once created by a star. There's no question of that.
We are all stars, man. This is what I've been trying to tell the world, man. We are stars. We got to just embrace it. And once we embrace it, then we'll be good. We'll be good. Professor John, bro, this conversation has been so enlightening, inspiring. I have learned so much. I'm happy because, like, when I graduated college, now I'm looking back like, man, bro, I wish I could kind of go back, because I wish I had this same, like, curiosity and this same just will to want to figure out stuff. I wish I had this while I was in college, because I don't know where I might have went down a science path, Professor John. I can't call you doctor because you do got your PhD too. So
yeah, that's right.
But I might have went down that science path.
Well, some people do call me Dr. John, one of my cousins. Although there is another Dr. John out there, and I ain't that good a musician. I'm not going to go there. But I will say I love teaching students science in a science program is one thing, but I have more fun than ever teaching non-science students in non-majors courses. And I always try and get involved in a non-majors course, both because I think it's really important that everybody embrace scientific ideas, but also because, God, they're so fun, and people come up with such great ideas. So it's a two-way street, and man, this is just terrific fun.
Ah, man, I'm so happy. Professor John emailed back. He said, "Yes, sir, I'll be there." I was like, "Let's go." Professor John, Dr. John, I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank you so much for coming out. You did not have to come here. You did not have to do this. And you came and you did it, sat down and chopped it up with me and my brother, the future of film, my brother, Joseph Harris. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. John. So when I point to you, all you got to say is, "We catch him." So when I point, just say, "We catch him." And you just got done watching another episode of YDT Dreamcatchers. Well, Dreamcatchers presents The Jason Smith Show, where we don't chase dreams. Nah.
We catch her.
We catch him.